Hey, this is Zen Zenith just sneaking in to say check out the House Show with Zen Zenith. That's me on Dragon Wagon Radio. The House Show is a live concert series featuring stripped-down performances and interviews with amazing singer-songwriters. We do the whole thing in front of a real live audience at a real live house and package the whole thing up into a podcast for you to experience in the ease of your home or car. Real intimate performances, real intimate conversations with great people. Check it out at thehouseshowshow.com or on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else good podcasts are found. We'll see you there.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers. So glad that you can join us. You know, we really appreciate you letting us into your home, your car, your shower, your garden, wherever it is that you choose to listen to this podcast. We are so thrilled to be one of your lucky podcasts that you love to listen to. Want to remind you, you can support the show by becoming an official member of the Quiller Nation as a patron through our Patreon account, where you can choose the level of participation that is right for you. Just head to don'tquillthepodcast.com and click the Patreon link there, and you will see a variety of exclusive perks only available to patrons, including monthly bonus features. This month's bonus feature includes an exploration into two sets of the Bard's famous lovers and his successful depiction of juvenile love versus mature love. Be sure to become a patron at the proper level to unlock these special features. The next bonus feature is going to include a couple of oft-neglected monologues from the canon that I feel deserve greater attention than they receive. See what I did there? We'll discuss relevance to Edward's life and his biography with those monologues that I feel are not seen or heard as often as they should be, but are parts of the brilliance of his writing and the autobiographical nature of his writing. You can also find out details about how you get entered into the Quiller of the Month contest. Our monthly winner receives an item of their choosing from the Quiller Swag Shop and a shout out from me. This month's winner is John Creider of Florida. Congratulations, John, and thanks for being a loyal Quiller. And go to the Swag Shop and choose your item. Producer Jake will be sending you the secret code. I'd like to thank all of our fellow Quillers who have already made the pledge of support. We are truly excited by the early response and our swiftly growing numbers. And speaking of support, I'm humbled by those of you who have written to me to support my bid for the Board of Trustees and presidency of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Please join my campaign to bring the Oxfordian movement into the new age by sending me an email stating your support for my petition to be president. You can email me at contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. And if you would like to CC that email to the organization directly, you can do that by CCing it to info@shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org. So write to me, say, yes, I support your petition. I always say it's best if you include not only your name, but also how long you've been a member in good standing of the organization. That way the nominating committee won't find it difficult to find you and validate your signatory status. Let's keep those signatories coming in, and let's look forward to embracing the democratic process with the hopes of bringing some dynamic new leadership to our movement and send the strats running for cover. And now, without any further ado, let's go ask some questions. My guest today's episode is John Foss. He's a competitive swim coach of 4 teams. Wow, 4 teams. He's a learn to swim instructor, entrepreneur, and swim curriculum designer. He has presented on swimming in Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, and America. He co-founded the Foss Swim Schools with his wife, Susan, in 1993. He served as the CEO of that organization for 25 years and creator of The Method. not like the actor's method, the swim method. He now serves as chairman and curriculum advisor for its 24 locations in 6 Midwestern states. And he is also renowned for his exemplary safety record, teaching more than 30 million lessons using his own swim curriculum. His swimmers have set American records and scores of age group national records. And along the way, not unlike Edison or Franklin, he has also been awarded several patents. In 2020, he published Oxenforders Begin to Swim. That's an interesting title. It details a family beginning the process of learning how to swim well. It's an illustrated children's book that outlines for parents many of the common misconceptions about swimming, as well as the first 6 safety skills young children need to master. He has served on several drowning task forces, and in 2014, he and his team worked with Fox 9 News to produce the Emmy-winning Drowning is a Silent Event. It's an 8-minute news piece that demonstrates why 70% of drownings are with a parent or lifeguard present and how to avoid that tragedy. He is also a professor, I use that with a small p, of what he refers to as the Shakespeare solution. And he has started the fashioning of a website to promote his theories about the 1609 publication of Shakespeare's sonnets and the 1623 First Folio. Welcome, John.
Well, hey, thank you very much for having me here.
So, John, tell me about the Shakespeare solution. What is that all about?
Well, it's just kind of a draft right now. It's a thought process that has to do with the how the 1623 folio was created, and the sonnets, as well as Venus and Adonis and the other poems and plays. And it's trying to work backwards using the science of excellence. And the science of excellence is probably only about 100 and 150 years old, where it's trying to decide how top performers become top performers. You know, Malcolm Gladwell did the 10,000 hours before you can kind of break through. Eddie Cantor says it takes 20 years of hard work before you can be an overnight success. So it's trying to take that and work backwards, trying to figure out, well, how exactly do you become the world's greatest expert? So Shakespeare in this case is not Shakespeare, but it's Shakespearean. It's the highest level of expertise. And whoever wrote Shakespeare was possibly the world's greatest expert at playwriting, poem writing, stories, whatever. And so that's what it's all about. And I mean, it comes with a companion book I've already written that's called Success Cycles, which is kind of how to create prodigy in young children. So that's what the Shakespeare solution. It's the how of becoming an expert.
I have heard of the 10,000 hour virtuoso theory, and I never knew that it was technically referred to as the science of excellence. But I have heard of that, and I have, sort of broken down the math of what it would require to complete 10,000 hours. And, you're talking about at least 3 hours per day, every day, for a series of at least up to around 10 years, if my math is correct. I don't have a calculator right here in front of me, but that's a lot of time spent with either an instrument or the composition of music or the study of just about anything. When I look back at my own personal career as a producer, director, and actor, and 65 Shakespearean productions at approximately 100 hours of rehearsal per production, I'm only at like 6,500 hours. I have another 3,500 hours to go before I can truly claim any kind of excellence as a Shakespearean artist.
Well, I think you're way beyond that, but I guess the best way to describe the process is it probably starts very young. And, if you're going to try to teach swimming, for example, swimming the window of learning how to swim well, we'll say like swim well, like the 4 Olympic strokes, and begins to close at age 6 and is almost completely closed by age 11. So that's the window. So the best swimmers have started long before age 10, and a prodigy is a step in the way to becoming a grandmaster. And the prodigy is defined as an adult master by age 10. And, that's what I try to do as a swimming coach. I say, I'm going to take these 6, 7, and 8-year-old kids, and by the time they're 10, have them be maybe a national record holder or a state champion or something like that in the competitive strokes of swimming. And as you get fully immersed in that, you realize it's actually very specialized. And I have a couple of great stories about swimming that could maybe help the audience kind of understand that.
Okay, so before we get into that, though, the relevance here is, of course, that what you believe, what I believe, what I think that most people who embrace the Shakespeare authorship question believe is that the true author of the works attributed to the name William Shakespeare had to have been this type of prodigy, had to have followed this science of excellence with more than 10,000 hours of work put in. And it's just impossible that the man from Stratford could have ever been that prodigy and have followed that science of excellence, mainly because of not having any access to the materials or the time to accomplish the feat. Is that sort of where we're headed?
Yeah, I think that there's been 9,000 articles and books that have been written. I think Warren has come up with that number of all of the research that's been done into the life of the real author, and that's where it gets really interesting. You realize that he was taught by Sir Thomas Smith, who was a polymath extraordinaire. He was a great teacher. He taught a number of other great Englishmen back in the day, back in the 1500s. And so you need a combination of a whole bunch of different things in order to have it work right. You got to start young. You got to have the right teachers that have a very specific method, and then you're probably going to have their 10,000 hours probably by the time you're 10. So it's a lot more intensive than your 3 hours that you're talking about per day.
A year or so ago, I must be going on maybe 2 years ago now, I gave a presentation as part of the Napa Symposium that was sponsored by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and I titled it Mentors to Genius and highlighted 3 of what I believe to be of the world's most profound geniuses. And what I talked about and pointed out was the mentors, the teachers, as you say, that came into their lives throughout their lives and then helped them gain that level of excellence through those teaching methods that you point out. And that you can find that on YouTube. It's available. It's called Mentors to Genius. If you just type in Stephen Sable, Mentors to Genius, you'll find the presentation. And it sort of speaks to what you're saying and gives 2 examples, particularly Mozart and Einstein. But I know you have some other specific examples that you like to compare when drawing a sort of a comparison between the life of Edward de Vere and the lives of these other genius prodigies.
I give you some examples. Probably in swimming, I could give you Michael Phelps and Mark Spitz, probably the 2 greatest swimmers by a long margin. Mark Spitz won 7 Olympic gold medals. He probably would have won 8, 9 if he would have actually competed in more than 7 events. He was the best backstroker in the prep meet before the Olympics. And then, of course, there's Michael Phelps. And what people don't realize that Michael Phelps and Mark Spitz had each set about 20 national records using butterfly backstroke, breaststroke, and freestyle by the time they were 10. I mean, they were truly masters by the time they were 10. And the reason they were is they were both younger brothers of like world-class female swimmers who had already found the best team, had already found the best coaches. They were immersed in it. And they were the little kid brother who just kind of came up and just kind of picked things up because they started young. And then starting at age 10, they just kept, going to higher and higher level. They were kind of addicted to success cycles, winning that next medal, setting that next record, and they bring it all the way up to the Olympics. So they run it 13, 14, 15 years past when they were already an expert. Well, that's the same thing that happens, is that a person who would have been Shakespeare would have been an expert by age 10 so that they can be a supreme expert by the time they're 23, 33, 43 years old. If you look at swimming in Minnesota, there was a guy named Prince. And Prince, Rogers Nelson, was a true prodigy. If you look at Michael Jackson, for all his failings, of course, but was also. Both of them by age 10 were, better than 99.999% of the population. Michael Jackson, arguably at age 10, was the best singer in the world. And Prince, at age 10, was taught by his mother and father in Minneapolis, who were both music teachers, could play virtually every instrument by age 10, had been writing songs at age 8. They were both masters by age 10. And then they just kept it going. And so you can learn.
You could argue that there are other parallels there with regards to that kind of genius that goes south, because as you mentioned, Michael Jackson and all of his, frailties. And then when you look at Prince, who also had issues with addiction and overindulgence. And then if you look at Edward de Vere, he certainly has a history of overindulgence and erratic behavior and, lots of those similar types of frailties. And you have to wonder if maybe the one comes along with the other. I mean, look at people like Edison, who was known for having all kinds of dark sides to him. Franklin getting kicked out of Paris because he couldn't keep it in his pants and was sleeping around with the daughters of diplomats. And they said, don't ever let him come back here again. So, we have, there is this sort of duopoly that happens with these geniuses and these prodigies, no?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think even Michael Phelps and Mark Spitz, if you read Mark Spitz's biography, talk that they are both kind of haunted, through personal tragedies and things that have happened in their lives. I think there's a number of factors that has to happen. I'll give a short list. Number one, you have to come from a unique family that's immersed in the discipline. So in the case of Edward de Vere, his family was ideal. He had uncles that invented the sonnets. His grandfather wrote 13 plays, the 15th Earl. There's translations of Ovid and the Aeneid. He was a younger sibling. He was remarkable by age 10. He was, he would have that outlandish dress. If you think about it, Michael Jackson and Prince would dress outlandishly to attract as much attention as humanly possible, but you put a microphone in front of them and they could hardly talk. Like how can you wow 30,000 people, screaming their heads off and dance and be the best dancer in the entire world, and then you literally can't talk to someone? So I think there's a lot of the psychology, and it's been kind of expressed that when you get the highest levels of this, that you can get a little extra baggage along the way. But I think for the most part, nothing comes free.
Well, that's for sure.
So, and I think that the true prodigies, people who excel to the next level, kind of have a they want to, they're ultra competitors. They want to win at all the events. So, Michael Jackson and Prince were probably the two best dancers. Unbelievable. Look at Elvis Presley. His vocal talents were unquestionable, but he was also probably the best dancer of his time as well. And, so they want to expand and do all sorts of other things. They want to write, produce. They want to organize their concerts. They want to do all of those different things. In the case of...
they want to appear in films. All three of those men also appeared in films. Prince, Michael Jackson, and of course Elvis was in, who knows how many movies. I want to win this race. He would just always break into song in the middle of who knows what for whatever reason. Eddie Murphy has a great bit on that in one of his stand-up routines where he's like, Elvis would just lemonade, that cool, refreshing drink, So, but again, also outlandish dress. I mean, look at Elvis's costumes. They're, some of them are in museums, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just amazing. You're dressed almost like a circus clown, with big collars and speckles, this and that. Yet when you're walking the car, you don't want people to take a picture of you. I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous, but if you think of this person, and I think it's safe to say that everyone knows now that Edward de Vere was the writer. He was the Italianate person who would be dressed in a certain way. And I think that I think it's addiction to success cycles, which is really important to understand. Is like, okay, well, what drives this? And I think, if I can define what a success cycle is, let's say you learn little facts, little things, then you work, you build something, and then you perform. And then you kind of glow in the bask in the glory of whatever you just did, and then you start planning the next one. So if you think of Prince or Michael Jackson, they just planned this big concert with all the dancing and all the singing and all the musicians. I mean, the level of detail that went into doing that, and then they finish the concert. They take their bows, and they're immediately thinking about the next concert they have to do. You know what I mean? Like, hey, don't bug me. I'm already thinking about the next one I got to do, and or the next performance or the next thing or whatever it might be, or the song they just thought of during the course of the concert. Who knows what's going on inside their heads, but it's something remarkable.
Well, certainly Edward de Vere was highly competitive. We know that through history. I mean, he was the Queen's champion jouster. His countenance shook spears, right, is what was written about him. He was her master spear shaker, as it were. And I think there's a double entendre there, too, a euphemism that's involved, I'm certain. And again, that's sort of that outlandish behavior. But he was also specifically known for his brilliance with music. He had a fine leg for dancing, was also a written description of him during his life. Many music books were written and dedicated to him, songs dedicated to him. There are a number of songs throughout the Shakespeare canon that you can find in many of the plays. And then, of course, there are all these other, areas of expertise that are obvious in the writing, such as seamanship and horsemanship and hawking and birding and hunting and military aspects. I mean, it's pretty clear that the writer was a polymath, as you say, and obviously in the same company of some of these other stars that you have mentioned, and he certainly was this great star. In fact, there's the book, this Star of England, or Our Star of England, I think, is one of the de Vere books about the Shakespeare authorship question. And I'm going to be receiving emails now from listeners who are upset, who are shouting at their earphones right now the name of the author, and shame on me for not having it at the top of my head.
Ogburn.
Thank you. It was Charlton Ogburn, wasn't it?
Yes. But yeah, I you have two thoughts I want to get there. Polymath, and I also want to talk about just the level of achievement and why, like you talk about a Shakespeare solution, the ultimate level of expert. I think that he is the ultimate expert. If you look at one of the quotes in that, maybe page 70 or so of Charlton Ogburn's there's a book of quotes, or there's two books of quotes, and Shakespeare has like 60 or 70 pages of quotes. I think the King James Bible has 28 pages of quotes, and then all other authors are like below 10 pages. Milton's maybe 8. Twain's like at 4 or something like that. It's a remarkable. He's so much farther above the next one. It's inconceivable. So that's number one. And then as far as polymath, polymath is a state I think every parent wants their child to be. You can paint your house, you can pay your bills, you can raise your kids, you want your kid to grow up to be kind of a mini polymath, like they're just unafraid to try anything. Just make a new dish, yeah, I'll do that. But a true polymath, when you talk about it, is like Leonardo da Vinci. And Shakespeare would be maybe 10 times greater than Leonardo da Vinci, or Benjamin Franklin, as you said, or Guillermo Cardano. Cardano wrote Cardenas Comfort, which is in his hand. But Guillermo Cardano wrote 400 books over 35 years on every possible subject. That was De Vere's role model. Okay, well, if his role model wrote 400 books, hey, maybe he wrote a couple hundred books himself. And so that, like, how do you become a polymath? And a polymath typically starts very young. Benjamin Franklin was flying kites and learned to swim, and he would let the kite pull him across a pond when he was 10 years old. He invented kite surfing when he was 10. It's just like, oh, that's pretty cool. And his mind was always thinking about the next project. Then he invents the rocking chair and the bifocals and the lightning rod and different things along the way. So I think that the state of polymath is a state that represents the author of Shakespeare. There's 1,000 legal references. There's 700 medical references, hunting, hawking, just everything along the way. So he had a personal framework that allowed him.
I agree with that. I think that you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Elon Musk is similar. Elon Musk uses a tree method to
and you know what? It's the book that Hamlet carries with him in the scene with Polonius, right? Is Cardanus Comfort. Mm-hmm. And as you say, one of Edward de Vere's heroes is the writer of that book. And, there's that famous line, Polonius says, what do you read, my lord? And he says, words. Words. And then he says, slander, sir. The satirical rogue says here. And then he goes on to talk about, about old men and how crotchety they are. And, what their eyes leak amber or something to that effect, I believe. Right.
Yeah. The genius, just so many awesome things. And, he's just citing one of the 400 works by Cardano. And, I think that you look at the other people, he was mentored by Thomas Smith, who was probably the great English polymath. He clearly had written letters of favor to John Dee, who was another polymath. And you could argue Lord Burleigh was similar. He was also taught by Thomas Smith. So there was kind of a confederacy of all of these people who were, it was an enlightenment, where people were just trying to, improve themselves and improve society. It was really the golden age, and he was probably the center of that whole age.
Indeed. And, and one of the things that you point out is, there was there is this confederacy, and I like that term rather than conspiracy. There was this confederacy of writers, particularly, and scholars. And of course, De Vere forms his own group and hires and pays for many of them to join around him and write the works that they're writing together. And it had to be really interesting. If I were like a Lilly or a Monday or a Nash, and I had the opportunity to sit in the room with this man and bounce ideas off of him and work in collaboration with him on creating characters and storylines and plot lines and inserting political jokes and the lampooning of members of court all into this. I mean, I can't imagine how exciting it must have been to be in that room when all of this creativity was happening, especially as you point out that De Vere destroys the bell curve. Right? Like if you take him out of the bell curve of the other geniuses that we've talked about, the curve suddenly becomes a completely different shape when you add him in, because he was so much more above all of those others. It just destroys the bell curve.
Yeah, he's at least a log or two beyond the next best guy. And I think it shows you the potential. I guess if you ever want to do another podcast, I think there's something really wrong with the current theory, in that it really is a moral hazard, to imagine that you could have a 16-year-old person that can just roll off and just start and in a few years can write Venus and Adonis and Titus and Andronicus, a play that takes 3 acting companies to produce. And I mean, it's not truthful. I mean, if someone has the desire to hit that next level or, whatever, you got to start young, and it takes a lot of work and effort to do that.
So what you're saying is that we can't just wake up in our straw bed in Stratford, England, and suddenly miraculously become the world's greatest genius and writer. That's not possible. We can't just spark from the head of Zeus and become, pardon the pun, Pallas Athena, the spear shaker. We're not allowed to do that. That's not how it works.
No. If your goal is to become an Olympic gymnast and win the Olympic gold medal in the all-around competition, and a girl comes up to me or a coach and says, "Hey, I'd like to do that," and she's 17 years old, well, that dream started about 14 years ago. And, it's probably not really very likely. And the same thing, you have to, the value of a great education, whether it be in athletics or in music or arts or the sciences, starts young and takes a lot of work. Can I just talk a little bit more about, I think the state of polymath, I think, is pretty important here. And I think if we can talk about one polymath from the last century, I think the closest person to an Edward de Vere, it's kind of odd, is Wernher von Braun, who was, of course, into rockets and things like that. And he had kind of a checkered career. But he started off, he was a son of a noble family. He was a baron. And at age 6, he was given a telescope, and he could see off into the stars. And, he dreamed of the stars. And then he started working with rockets and rocketry. And at age 12, he got arrested because he had made a rocket wagon that basically blew up in his town. And, think of that.
I didn't know that story.
Yeah. Think of that as a success cycle. He's just going, and imagine that's like his fourth wagon, and he's gotten bigger, and now he's going to go a certain speed or whatever. Who knows where he got to that point? And of course, it just keeps going, and he then gets into rocketry. And at age 21, he gets it makes me,
I have visions of Wile E. Coyote ordering from Acme in my head and, jetting down the road trying to catch the Roadrunner in his rocket wagon.
Right, exactly right. And then, but you think of that as a success cycle. He had to learn, he had to build, he had to perform. Didn't work out well, but part of being a coach is your kid could get disqualified, could lose, could get last, whatever. But you get kids through those performances, and then you win, lose, or draw. You're always going to try to get them to get to the next level and the next level, and you're trying to get them to do that. Well, clearly Wernher von Braun did that. By age 21, he'd thrown up enough rockets and he learned enough that he got his PhD. He was like the expert of all Germany. He goes to Peenemünde. Of course, then a very checkered career. He says the V2 rockets. He's raining, a lot of bad stuff down on people, and he did a lot of things in rocketry there. End of the war, comes over with Operation Paperclip into the United States, and then there's the Redstone program and the Mercury program and the Gemini program and all of these different rocket launches, one after another, and he just keeps pushing it forward. And just think of each one of these rocket launches as a success cycle. He has to learn, he's learning about biology, chemistry, whatever. And he's gathering it up. He invents the space station of the future in the 1950s. He's the voice of Disney. The reason we all think of a German voice is because he would get up then and he would explain space and science on the Walt Disney show. And so people think of that thick German accent as being smart. And then it keeps progressing until, they're going to land on the moon. He convinces the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, we're going to land on the moon by the end of the decade. And sure enough, they do. And they land 6 more times. And then he dies, and we've never gone back. And what you see there is a person who the success cycles just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and, all the way until it just does the impossible, landing on the moon and coming back in 1969. And, that's the power of wanting to become a polymath, to the next level. And I think that if we look at De Vere was that exact person, he spoke through the plays, he spoke through the poems, and that's what it is. That's the most likely solution to become a Shakespearean expert, which von Braun was close.
Yeah. And, so that obviously brings to mind, and I'm sure I'm not the only one listening to you speak and suddenly thinking about a modern day example, though somewhat of a now controversial figure. But, of course, jumping out of my brain right now, Elon Musk and his rockets are shooting across the world and into space. And would you say that maybe we have another version there in this guy, in Musk?
No, I think absolutely. I mean, you go back to, the computer programs that he was writing back then. He came from a family that allowed him to be able to do a lot of this stuff, but he put himself through school, developed his own method of learning. He learns everything by a tree. So he got a bunch of rocket books, and he basically digested them in about 2 weeks. And he said, okay, some are roots, some are trunks, some are branches, some are the little leaves that go on the end of the branches. And he's able to have a personal frame to keep all this information. If you think about, Edward de Vere, Shakespeare, knew maybe 75 to 100,000 words in English. Plus, he knew a whole bunch more in other languages. Could think of 400 different books in his head. Often citing works that he had done under other names. Along the way. I mean, he had a method of memorizing it, and I'm sure that if you look at any a person like Mozart was, did 900 works in 35 years. Maybe 180 of them weren't finished, but they were started in concept, and each one of those things was like a little rocket launch. He has an idea, and then he works and learns, and then eventually performs it. And does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely makes sense. And, if you look at each of von Braun's rocket launches and compare them to a work of Shakespeare, you could create like a really interesting sort of overlay of timelines of these two lives and their, pardon the use of the term, trajectory. If his rocket wagon was his Venus and Adonis, for instance, type of a thing. Although I'm sure, like one of the things that I think, as we look into the Shakespeare authorship question and we look at De Vere as the prime candidate for having been the true author using the pseudonym Will I Am Shakespeare, I believe that what we need to include, and I think there are others who would believe this, Roger Strittmatter is definitely one of them who has done a lot of work into this. We have to look at the earlier works and earlier writings and poems of De Vere, and maybe those were his rocket wagons prior to Venus and Adonis, which was a shot at the moon, if not onto the moon itself.
Yeah. So I would probably, if I were to use the analogy, I would say that Romeus and Juliet by Albert Brooke or Arthur Brooke, was that rocket wagon. And, it was, there was probably, as Robert Prechter aptly has kind of figured out, that T.H. wrote a poem at age 10, which seems about the right age to have that first performance. Queen Elizabeth was also writing poems when she was, young. I think it was a way to show off or a way to, to perform in front of court. And if you think about, at court and entertainment and, what is the Courtier by Baldassare Castiglione is like, hey, you're not supposed to show that you're the person that did it. Maybe just a little wink or a little nod. Hey, and like you're sitting there and, hey, look at all this going on. I think there's a French.
Sure. In fact, early in my career as a stage director, I received some great advice from an elderly gentleman while sitting next to me at a bar. I was doing a dinner theater production at a friend's restaurant. It was early on in my career as a director, and they gave me the opportunity to do some dinner theater at their restaurant. And was sitting at the bar doing some, calculations on how the set could come into the space and how we would build it and support it without attaching anything to the walls, et cetera. And the man was sitting next to me, and somebody came along and I started telling somebody all about my play and what I was doing and that I was the director and et cetera, sort of, I guess, in a braggadocio sort of way. And this little old man sitting next to me turned to me and he said, I want to give you just a small bit of advice, young man. You seem like a bright young man with a lot of talent, but it's always better when people discover your talents without your help.
Ah, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't that's amazing. That's really good. I think that maybe that's part of it. I think that the Veres had a writing style, by the way, that was very interesting. I mean, Horace Vere, I think Roger Strittmatter brings up, that he would pun on his name as he's writing something. And, that they would have, Vere and truth and different things there that would be, allude to their motto and stuff like that. And so I think that there was also a different time. If I could digress a little bit, or maybe I tell you how I kind of got into this, is I think would kind of explain it a little bit better. Because it came through Mark Twain when I was about 18 years old. And Mark, I took a class. I went to a really great school in Minneapolis, and I had the best teacher and the best class. It was a Mark Twain class my senior year. So I was like 17 or 18 years old, and every person had to do a presentation. Maybe 5 or 10, 15 minutes or whatever it was, to the class on another work that Mark Twain did that was not being studied. And so I got Is Shakespeare Dead? And, it was the shortest book he ever wrote, the last book he ever wrote. And I'm like, okay, well, and so that's what I did. I read the book and I'm like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And, basically it said, hey, people think Mark Twain's the greatest writer of all time. Well, I have two things for you. One, Mark Twain isn't my name. I'm Samuel Longhorn Clemens. And number two, the greatest writer is a guy named Shakespeare. And guess what? That wasn't his name. I don't know who it was, but that's who it is. And I remember going to my teacher, Mr. Hatch, and I'm going, so Shakespeare, it was just a fake name like Mark Twain? And he goes, yeah, so who was it? And he goes, I don't know who it was. He says, but I can tell you one thing. He says, if Mark Twain says it's a fake name, that this person knew more, whatever, that it was not the person they say it is, then I trust him. It's like this. And so then I sit there, and our school was right next to the Guthrie Theater. It's a very famous theater. And when we go see the Shakespeare plays, they always have a couple a year.
Well, he certainly knew what he was talking about, right? I mean, he's this. If Shakespeare's the greatest English writer of all time, Mark Twain is the greatest American English writer of all time, because obviously they're technically both, writing in English. But, if you're going to, and I remember in school, and I don't know if it's still the case today, but in school, I remember we did English Lit years 1 and 2, freshman, sophomore, and then junior year was all American Lit, and then senior year was back to English Lit. And each of those 3 English Lit years, we did one particular Shakespeare play at least per year. But obviously during that junior year, we covered a lot of Twain. He was, a big part of American literature. And, here's a guy who knew what he was talking about. He knew about the ability to place satirical attacks and pokes at the establishment within his writing. He knew how to add wit and humor. He knew how to address tragic and dramatic subjects as well that also maintained their entertainment value. And he certainly knew how to create a pseudonym out of basically a pun on words and a name that in itself was its own little joke, right? And I do believe that when he looked at Shakespeare, he knew exactly, he maybe did not know that it was Edward de Vere, but he is, quoted as writing, it had to have been one of the wolfish earls, I believe is the direct quote that he uses. So he was, sniffing in the right direction as the sleuth that he sort of tried to be there, but never was able to fully engage and do the investigation.
Yeah. I think that he has a guess that it might be Bacon or whatever, but he doesn't really know. But what he does know is that this person had a supreme amount of talent at writing poetry. He used to walk around with a book and would read quotes and lines from Shakespeare because he just loved reading them. And just thought, this is the best. And so, once you start off there, so if you think of the Oxfordian movement or Shakespeare authorship, just larger, it starts off like with the what. There's a book that's found in the middle of the road, and it's the 1623 folio, and people are like, well, what's this? And they look at it, wow, these are some great plays, huh? And they're flipping it over. A guy named Shakespeare wrote this. And they're just literalists. They're at the scene of an accident or crime. They say, oh, look at this. But later on, the investigators come in, people who are experts who've actually written books like this themselves, like Mark Twain, and they go, wait. This is not just a guy, this is someone else. This person, look what they know. They know 1,000 legal. This is a lawyer. No, maybe it's a doctor. Maybe it's who wrote this? So that's Mark Twain was at the who stage. Stage 1 is the what stage, just like what is it? And so those are literalists, and he came at it the stage 2. The stage 3 would be kind of like the like the Shakespeare solution. It's like, okay, well, what's the how? How do people push beyond and become super expert? And there's a guy named Anders Ericsson, and who Malcolm Gladwell got that 10,000 hours from. And Anders Ericsson basically, graphs it out that most people, when they learn to drive, will just drive a car, will just go to automatic learning. They'll just sit there and then you say, well, how was your drive over here? Wow, frankly, I don't remember it. It's just, I was doing something else. I was listening to a podcast, or I was listening to the radio, or whatever it might be. They tune it out. They put it on autopilot. But some people become the world's best drivers. Well, how do they become the world's best drivers? They're constantly working and thinking and doing whatever. They push themselves, and it takes active work to constantly push yourself higher and higher and higher and higher on that scale, you think of the 1623 folio. The 1623 folio, I also own a Norton, large copy. And it's probably the moon landing and return might be close. I don't want to insult any people who's worked on the NASA projects or whatever, but if you look at the complexity of those 38 plays and everything that's in there, like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And that doesn't even include the poems. It's like there's a monumental amount of work that went into that. I think that's a moonshot unto itself. And I think people are like, oh, well, they found some old documents and they put it together, and his, sister, his daughter, or his, the Pembrokes or whatever, and they just put it together in a folio. No. That's something that's a masterwork. It's far beyond, normal excellence. It's, I guess that I think people underestimate.
Now I'm going to be getting emails from people who work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or Elon Musk's people. A bunch of rocket scientists are going to be writing to me complaining that you said that the 1623 folio was more important than sending a man to the moon.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't say more important. I'd say, like, I would say equivalent in complexity, if not more complex. I think it involved...
They're going to want to send you to the moon.
It involved 4 different printers. It probably involved 50 years worth of effort, and just the planning of it, and it was probably in the planning stages 15 years. It probably wasn't something that was easily done. It was,
Well, one of the things that you touched on lightly in this conversation is the injustice of this, misidentifying of the true author of these works. And, that whole mythology of he just, sprang out of a straw bed in Stratford and became an instant genius in everything, as though he had been touched by the finger of God, type of thing. And, certainly, the other aspect, the other thing that Stratfordians love to talk about is, this mermaid tavern of all knowledge, where he picked up all this stuff and he was really not a genius, but he just happened to have a photographic memory and could remember everything everyone said to him word for word. And that's how he put the words onto the page in order to create all of this expertise in all of these different fields of study. And I do believe that, as you alluded to, and what will make another great episode in the future, John, is for us to have a conversation about how damaging that is to generations who have come since, who, rather than being taught that through hard work and good solid education you can become this type of polymath, rather than it just happens to you or doesn't happen to you like some sort of magic wand.
Yeah, well, I think it is a great injustice, and if you look at what this, there's 2 competing stories. There's one that it's this, the Glover's son who goes up and makes, and starts and learns poetry, whatever, and goes to town and then comes back and then just forgets forgets it. And then you have another one about a person that's so involved with it that he basically sells his entire fortune. He plunders it all in an effort to just keep enriching others, and writing new books to enliven other people. There's an ancient thing it's called the story of the pelican. The pelican has a bunch of dead chicks around it and splays itself and gives of itself to wake up, and that's kind of the same thing, is that he basically loses everything. He loses his fortune, he loses his status, he loses, his name. No one knows who he is. Granted, he buries it in the works all the time, but I taught you can't ask for a more noble effort. And then
it's definitely all there in plain sight, right? You just have to know the key to the map. It's like if you handed a map of the world to someone in ancient times, they would be completely flabbergasted and unable to decipher. But if you gave them a key to the map, these X's mean railroad tracks, or these blue lines are walking trails and these green lines are roadways. These are things that we see in modern maps today. If you don't have the key to the map, it's hard to read the map, and he puts all of it into the map, and it's just a matter of having the right key. I say this to actors all the time when I'm directing the plays. I'm in rehearsals right now for A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I'm consistently going through the rehearsal process with actors and giving them keys to the map. And the only way you can successfully do that, in my mind, is you have to include Edward's life and the details that about Edward's life that are inserted into the play. When you have Theseus, for instance. This was rehearsal just the other evening. Theseus is reading the list of entertainments that are available. And there's this, obvious stab at Edmund Spenser for being a horrible, boring writer. And when the actors realize that the author is criticizing a competitor through this part of the play, and they play that out in front of an audience, the audience may not quite understand the Edmund Spenser reference, but they will understand that these titles, these works, are being mocked before them. And that's important, I think, to the enjoyment of watching the play.
100%. I mean, I think every person should read Hamlet. And if you can read it in the. It probably took me 2 or 3 times to really get it. As you read through it. But Hamlet, of course, is Edward de Vere, and it's him. And I think that Hamlet actually stands for something. But frequently his characters will end in EO, like Rome EO. So that you can I'll figure that out. Well, if you look at some of the characters, one of the characters has an EO at the end of it. And you go, oh, that's interesting. And they walk up and Hamlet and this character with an EO at the end meet and go, hi, nice to meet you. Hi, nice to meet me. Yeah, I'm you. We're both the same. True. They're like laughing because for a moment in Hamlet, 2 Edward de Vere's, one old, one young, are meeting at the same time. I mean, but once you know how to read the plays, and you go, oh, that's really, really funny. Oh my gosh, they're laughing because they both are self-aware of who they really are, and I mean. So there's like a whole nother level of brilliance to the works that if you don't understand like who that polymath prodigy, hidden author is, you can't enjoy the works. Like it's a great example you just gave.
Well, and Hamlet himself is that polymath prodigy. And that's that reflection. And that's why that play is so autobiographical, because Hamlet is absolutely the smartest character on the stage. He may even be the smartest character in all of Shakespeare. And I've played the role twice, and I still have missed some of the pieces and nuances and aspects of Edward de Vere's life that come out through that man, that character. And, I've studied that play more than I think most people ever have, in having prepared it for performance over a 2-year period twice in my lifetime, and then having directed it twice more after that. And I can tell you that it'll probably take me another 20 times before I actually feel like I've mastered that great master work.
Yeah, well, maybe 1 in 10,000 actors could probably ever really do Hamlet. I mean, first of all, it's a massive work. I mean, it's beyond comprehension for me to even know how you do it. I mean, like that's just a massive work. So I have to applaud.
I'll tell you, I like to tell this story because, well, you can't. First of all, no one other than Kenneth Branagh on film does the whole play uncut from beginning to end. So when you're preparing the play for performance, one of the most difficult things. I always said I wanted to write a book called Cutting Hamlet, and like a guide for producers and directors on what scenes can be pared down, what can be excised, what must be saved and salvaged and cannot be removed, because that's one of the first most difficult tasks when you're going to put on that play. And when my cutting takes it down to about 2 hours and 40 minutes, it's an hour 20 first half and an hour 20 second half, and that reduces Hamlet's line count down from somewhere, I think it's like 1550 plus is what it is uncut, and I had it down to, I think, just over 1,100 words, just barely over 1,100 words.
Wow.
And one of my memorization tactics is that I record the lines. I record myself speaking the lines as I intend to speak them, and then play myself back to me over and over and over, and like music, right? Like this is how we memorize songs, right? And it was an hour and 30 minutes of just me speaking. So he's more than half of the stage time. He's more than half of the air time, even cut down to that size. And in memorization, at about 1,000 lines, a little over 1,000 lines, my brain just got full, and I started having a really difficult time struggling to learn like those last 100 words. And it wasn't the last 100. It would be, I would master some of those final lines in the final scenes and then lose somewhere else in act 2 or act 3, and it was a tremendous struggle. And I felt like, well, maybe there's only a maximum amount of words my brain can remember, and I'm just never going to get this right. And I had a dear friend who was involved in the production with me. He was my production manager at the time. And I went to him lamenting about, I think I've hit my limit. I can't capture these last 50 or so words. I'm at this point now. And he said to me some of the greatest advice I've ever had from a friend. He said, Stephen, if you're trying to deliver 1,100 lines to the audience and you blow 10 of them, aren't you still at a tremendous success rate? Like, look at you, 98% accurate. What more do you want from yourself? Stop trying to be perfect. It's live theater. It's no one has to be 100%, but Edward de Vere was 100%. That's the difference, right? That's why I'm not a polymath. I'm just an actor.
Yeah, but I think that part of being a polymath or whatever is that you're just unafraid to start anything, and then you bring it to a certain point, and you launch it. And I think that over many successive versions, the final 1623 Hamlet was actually created. Just like Romeo and Juliet. I mean, in iambic pentameter. I mean, are you kidding me? Think about that. Well, how hard would that be able to do it? But I bet you the first one was a sloppy copy, and that when they were delivered on stage, it was just a version. I don't think anyone's ever done it perfectly. Maybe Kenneth Branagh has, but I mean, it's such a rare thing. So you really should, you shouldn't beat yourself up too much about that. But
well, on film, you can, you get a gazillion takes, right? You can just take another take and another take and another take, and then as long as it takes and as many takes as it takes to get it perfect. On the stage live in front of, and when I was performing Hamlet, it was with my Shakespeare Festival in Redlands, California, at the Redlands Bowl Amphitheater, which seats about 3,800 people in its seating areas plus lawn sections. And so when you're standing out there in front of a couple thousand people, and you're delivering one of the greatest monologues of all time, you want to make sure that you get it word perfect and that it is a compelling performance, to say the least. But I do think that the final version, I do believe that you're right, that there are multiple. We have the first quarto, we have the second quarto, and then we have the folio. And I do believe that there were probably what people have referred to as the Hamlet earlier drafts. And I think that it was a master work that required a first draft, a second draft, a third draft. There might have even been 10 versions for all we know. That's how plays are written and worked today. There are giant Broadway musicals that there are 10 versions of, because in test performances and in workshopping, they perfected them, cleaned them, cut a song, added a song, whatever the case might be. And I believe that that's the truth about Hamlet. But I also believe that 1623 folio version was never performed prior to that publication. I think that version is for posterity and was not meant to be a staged version.
Yeah, possibly not. I don't even know how anyone could do the whole thing. I think it's a lot. Like even the famous line, "to be or not to be," that's probably the most famous line of all Shakespeare. But a lot of times, I believe that one of his early poems was signed "ever or never," and just why that's important is that, of course, "ever," as you alluded to in the beginning, is E vir, and then O is Oxford, R is 17. So Edward Vere, Oxford 17, and then never with a period is ne vers pas, which is French for unseen. So if you just think of that, you go, how is he signing it? He's signing it Edward Vere, Oxford 17, unseen. That's who I am. I'm just I'm behind the themes. So when you all sudden say, hey, to be OR, as it's capitalized in there, to be Oxford 17 or not to be, right? That's the question. Should I be nobler in the mind? So the idea is like, hey, do I be this, Earl of Oxford, or do I be something bigger than that? And I think he chose to be bigger than that. And, and it, of course, wasn't easy. And, and he was trying to do bigger and better, rocket launchers, and he really gave of himself. I maybe I'm conflating my own emotions about things, but I think it's,
No, and it's interesting because there's also another hint there in that line that he does on purpose, and the pentameter breaks there.
Really?
If you count the beats of that line, it doesn't scan properly.
Yeah. Yeah, like there should be something else that's missing there. Yeah.
He does that on purpose. He's pointing to that line specifically. It stands out from the verse on purpose. And he does that a lot in a lot of different plays. And I tell actors, look for that. If sometimes he gives you what appears to be an 11-beat line, and he's calling upon the actor to exercise their own choice in elision, in eliding a syllable somewhere in that line that's not necessarily important. Sometimes he gives you what looks to be a 9-beat line, and what he's saying is provide emphasis on a certain word. Those words are commonly the ED words, like when Romeo uses banished, because banished is so much more impactful than banished. There are also versions of punished and murdered. Imagine what it sounds like to have been murdered as opposed to being murdered, right? So he does that on purpose, but sometimes there is no emphasis possible to choose, and there is no elision that is obvious, and he specifically has given you an 11 or 12 beat line, and I believe that he's doing that because he's saying to the actor, you need to make sure this line stands apart. And if it's a reader reading it, but I don't believe that I believe he intended them, except for some of the, except for like Hamlet for posterity, I do believe was never intended to be fully performed. But I believe everything else was intended to be performed, not read, because only 10% of the population could read anyway. And he was creating this great propaganda machine for his prince, the Queen of England. And so I think he's giving both actor, who is the interpreter of the works, and audience who is hearing the work, these hints, these clues that are in there that need to be need to stand apart from the rest of the text. And that's also something that I direct when I'm directing actors for their performance of the text.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's really fun. It's really fun to watch their minds blow,
Yeah, well, I don't know how people like Kenneth Branagh can really look at the complexity and all that's there, and they probably just don't want career suicide. They probably know that they can't say, oh yeah, it really was someone else. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Why they wouldn't say, oh yeah, well obviously this was there's a person who was a lawyer or a person who whatever, a doctor or who had all this extra training and knew all these books and stuff like that. I do think that knowing the bigger frame makes the work so much better. I think
the time is coming, John. I really do. I believe the time is coming. I believe for 100 years, Oxfordians have been battling against the gates of academia, trying to convince the guardians of the keep of the mythology of Stratford that they need to open the gates and let us in. And it's been a fruitless effort. I believe that the new focus needs to be a grassroots effort, and that we need to win the battle of popular opinion. And once we do that, academia will have no choice but to open the gates, because the people will be storming the walls. And I think that is the new approach that Oxfordians need to take. I think it is happening already. It's happening with things like this podcast series. It's happening through historical fiction writing, like a previous guest in the last episode shared with us. I think it's happening through people like you who are making these comparisons and pointing to just the absolute reason that is used here in making this determination without emotion being involved or without financial connection to the Stratfordian myth. And I think, academia be damned. Let's go out and do a grassroots effort and win the popular people's opinion and watch how fast things will change. I believe that's the course of action.
Yep, and it may be Malcolm Gladwell writes a book that's a bestseller, and also people go, of course, it's whatever, and it will probably flip in about a week. But whenever that week is, who knows? It may be in 100 years, but it will flip, and then there's probably going to be 500 years of people just basically trying to figure out, okay, what exactly did he write before this? And then he's basically completely autobiographical, so his entire life story is there, and he predicts like, hey, it's not going to be now. It's like when in the sonnets, as Hank Whittemore says, hey, when all the breathers of this world are dead, hey, someone in the future, 500 years when the Phoenix, hey, it'll come out there. It's all there. He knows the power of his pen.
He definitely had a mind to the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and he points it out in several of the plays too. The most glaring example, of course, being in Julius Caesar, when, they kill Caesar and they say, in tongues unknown to us, and I'm paraphrasing the hell out of that right now, but basically they say, in places unknown and in languages yet to be discovered, this bloody act will be played out again and again throughout history. And, it's a little bit of braggadocio on De Vere's part, saying this play is so good, people will be performing it forever. But also the connection to this historical event is so important to the history of the world that it will continue to be looked upon and played out in performance throughout till the end of time. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. I think he did see that type of a future, and he had that possibility, that ability to sort of predict where things were going to go. I don't know if he could have predicted that there would be a podcast like this talking about his life and trying to right the wrong of the injustice that stripped him of his name and his works. But I sometimes like to think he's smiling down upon us from wherever he is, saying, keep up the good fight, young man, keep up the good fight.
Yeah, and I think there is a point here is that I don't know if it was such an injustice. I think that he made a deal to bury his name, but that's a whole another discussion. But I think that the process of being this extreme level prodigy, does bring along with it a certain amount of shyness. Because they're so deeply introverted, they have so much going on inside of their head. I think that there's a little bit of that. And I also think that the reason he wasn't, that he knew the power of his pen, that in the power of his rhyme or whatever, because he probably had done 100 works before Venus and Adonis. I think that's Bob Prechter thinks it's 150, which I think is probably about right. It's probably similar to Guillermo Cardano. And, and he saw the effect on court, on the public, on everything. He knew the power of what he was doing just from experience. It wasn't, maybe all bragging. It was just probably because he knew, well, it's pretty powerful stuff, guys. This is,
Yeah. And for you members of the Quiller Nation, if you haven't already, you can find the episode where Bob Prechter is my guest. And it's not that many episodes ago. So if you look back through the library at don'tquillthepodcast.com, you'll find the episode where Bob and I speak about his research and his findings and exactly what John is talking about. John, this has been such a great and fascinating conversation, and I hope the listeners have truly enjoyed it as much as I have. We definitely need to have you back again to discuss some of these other topics. It happens a lot with my guests that we find a little side road that we say, we need to go explore that side road in another episode in the future. So I'll look forward to inviting you back again for another episode as we can talk about some of the things that we've touched on today. Before we wrap up today, I do want to remind listeners that one of the bonus feature ideas we are planning to do is a watch-along movie. This is where I tell you which film we are selecting, help you cue the film up to the exact same spot to begin at, and I and a guest will hit play at the same time as you, and we will provide commentary about the film as it runs. So send me your suggestions for what you think the first Shakespeare film should be that we should do as a watch-along movie. Should it be a classic such as Zeffirelli's Taming of the Shrew, or a more modern iconic film such as Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, or even a more recent film such as Fassbender's Macbeth? Send your requests soon so we can plan the first watch-along event. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Remember, you can write to me by sending an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Send me your feature ideas and requests for bonus content. Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming an official member of the Quiller Nation as a patron through our Patreon account, where you can choose the level of participation that is right for you. Head to don'tquillthepodcast.com and click on the Patreon link to see a variety of exclusive perks only available to patrons, including those monthly bonus features that I've been talking about, such as the first movie watch along, which will be coming soon. I want to once again thank my guest, John Foss, for joining me. We'll be inviting John to return in the future for more intriguing discussion. Until next time, fellow Quillers, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.